So, welcome to the HR Green Room, the place where people, culture, and a couple of splashes of green come together. We're your hosts. I'm James Proctor, Chief Operating Officer at Phase 3.
I'm Louise Johnston, Head of Sales and Customer Success at Phase 3.
And together we lift the curtain on the world of HR with fresh ideas, honest conversations, and a few surprises along the way. Each episode will ask what made us green with envy, what deserves a green light, and of course we'll be joined by some brilliant guests, as we are today, who will bring their own colour to the conversation. So grab a seat, the show's about to start in the HR Green Room. So welcome, Tom. Do you want to give us a brief introduction to who you are and where you're from? The Scylla moment, we call it. What's your name and where'd you come from?
Absolutely love doing the Scylla Black moment. Yeah, look, I'm Tom. I'm the founder and CEO at Pinpoint. We're ATS, recruiting across 160 countries, about 1,000 customers based in the UK. Been about 10 years now. And yeah, really, really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And how long have you been part of Pinpoint, Tom?
So I'm the founder. So from the very beginning, so
very
rapidly approaching 10 years now and feeling that and sort of starting to get some grey hair. But yeah, I've been around a while. And so it's been great. I think we entered the market at a really interesting time. And sort of have watched a lot evolve, like the shift from company to candidate and then COVID and then labour markets and everything. So it's been a fun journey so far.
Talent acquisition is a crazy world to be involved in, isn't it? It's fair to say. And it's interesting. I think we first came across Pinpoint actually with one of our clients, a large international client who chosen you and who wanted integrations work basically for us to link it to their HCM application to really boost the candidate experience. But we've got a particular flavour for the conversation today, Louise's favourite topic in terms of AI, and talent acquisition does seem to be one of those areas where AI really has evolved the process massively. So I'm really interested just to understand what excites you the most about the impact that AI already is and can continue to have on talent acquisition.
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of different lenses for that, right? I think like the already is, I'm sure we'll talk in loads of detail about, but to me, it's almost a defensive narrative a lot at the moment. It's helping recruiters do a lot more with a lot less. And that seems to be the sort of macro pressure being put on teams. I think the thing that excites me a lot more, though, is the sort of long-term opportunity that I think AI brings. And I think, again, the narrative today is very near-term focused. For me, one of the things we really wanted to do when we started Pinpoint was like actually elevate the profession. It feels like a lot of people see TA as like order takers and they don't see them as like particularly strategically valuable. I think my argument has been actually everybody sort of says people is everything in our business and nobody really drives their strategy functionally downstream of that. And so I think AI allows the TA function to really elevate, to bring a much sort of earlier interventions into the sort of strategic picture of the business. I think it also allows us to do a lot of stuff that just wasn't possible before. I mean, like, again, the narrative today is, how do I do less administrative stuff so I can do more of this? But there's also a whole bunch of things TA could have done that they never did before. And I'm very excited about the role AI is going to play in allowing that to happen more.
Well, what are those kind of things? Sorry, Louise, what are those kind of things that TA could do more of?
Loads. Look, I think loads more. I think one is sort of calling out sort of shortcomings in the process earlier, right? So I think that one of the things we get really excited about is building context across the sort of soup to nuts of the hiring process, and then actually being able to deliver insights at different stages that wouldn't happen. So, for example, instead of focusing on how AI can accelerate a process you're already running, one of the things we've seen a load of clients get real success with is use AI to do intake notes or to digest intake notes that have come through from your hiring managers, etc. Do a disparity comparison, right? So Louise said she wanted A, B, and C, but actually in her scorecards, she looked for something else. In her interview transcriptions, she never asked about A, B, and C. She instead asked about D, E, and F. When candidates got hired, the candidate that got hired did not have the thing that she said at the beginning was an absolute must-have. How do we make that a loop rather than stuff that sits in isolation? And how do we make sure that A, Louise learns from that in a diplomatic way as a hiring manager, but also B, next time we go out and open a rec call, we go through an intake process, how do we remember that happened and challenge appropriately and evolve the way we advertise the role and assess for the role? Because I think AI is an accelerant, but it can accelerate the wrong stuff, right? And so like, that's one example. I think another is a lot of TA folks, in a nice way, are often guilty of speaking TA language and not sort of business and strategic language. And the CEO uses different framing and sees TA as a different problem. How can we use AI to translate reporting and insights up to that layer in a way that it actually sort of makes a difference to the business strategy? Like there's loads of these, but like I'll pause for a sec.
I really like those examples, though, to be honest, Tom, and I'd like to hear more of them because obviously everyone's talking about AI making recruitment faster and cheaper. And I've actually got a few friends at the moment looking for jobs, and they're struggling and they don't work in technology. But the blame straight away is I'm not getting through because of AI, I'm not getting selected, and I'm not even hearing back. So as you said, that kind of seems to be the the narrative of the general public. So could you give us some more examples? I really liked the one where you said about candidates or hiring managers as well, learning where they might have gone wrong in the process, which wouldn't have been picked up if AI wasn't in the mix. So I'd really like to hear more positive examples of how it's actually helping candidates in the job market too.
Yeah, look, for sure. I think there is a narrative, and I think it's sadly true in some cases, but sort of not in all, that AI has been a negative thing for the candidate experience. I think obviously everybody sees their problems as kind of one-sided, right? Candidates just see a black box and they're very intimidated and upset by that, and rightly so. And I think recruiters see AI as a sort of negative connotation for candidates because the volume of applicants has just gone absolutely through the roof, and the level of personalization and, to a different degree, fraud is just an absolute nightmare for recruiters, and it's sort of actually fighting against the candidate experiences they want to. I think this is the whole point of AI at the lower end of the chain, right? And so like when you said that there's candidates who aren't being communicated with or never hearing back, to me, like that's just intolerable at any scale in any organization today. Automation has solved that problem. It's not even AI, it's just simple automation. And I think there is zero excuse for not getting back to a candidate. I think the thing that's interesting is that AI coupled with automation allows us to do things that you couldn't do before at scale. So one, like when we think about automated rejections, for example, how is that happening and why is that happening? I think it's important to understand there's a difference between inference. I scanned Louise's CV and I just didn't like what I saw and I didn't attribute some skills, versus Louise said she wasn't entitled to work in the industry or the country in which she's applying for a job. Those are two things. One is an acceptable use of AI and automation, one isn't, right? But there's lots of micro things that can happen. So for example, we have clients who will have an automation set up where if they get over the average number of applicants for a role, let's say they hit 500 applicants for a role, it will automatically flag that and email every candidate and say, hey, just so you know, we've had a really large volume of applicants for this role. You're still in the mix. We're really sorry. It's just going to likely take us another couple of weeks to get back to you because it takes a bit longer. We have a lot of people who are using scorecards now, and they're very intentional about how they use scorecards, but they'll use AI to write proper, detailed feedback and rejection emails to every candidate based on scorecard outcomes. So rather than just saying no, they'll give actual pointers and advice on things, right? Like there's a lot more that you can do at a lower level. I think you have to actually put the effort in and care about it. And I think we've seen a lot of people use AI and automation to make their lives easier, but they haven't thought about other stakeholders, both candidates, but also, as you've said, hiring managers, leadership, etc. And so we can keep going, but hopefully that gives you a sense.
I like that in terms of the implementation in particular and that thought process around the actual journey. I think it's something we focus on significantly in terms of the adoption of the technology. And when it comes to talent acquisition, I'm always the person that kind of flags that this is the front door to your organization, isn't it? This first interaction with the business as a candidate is how you will consider what's the rest of the tech going to look like. What does that personal experience look like? And I really like the examples there of if you've had loads of applications for a high volume recruitment role, actually just give people a heads up on that. Because I think that is something that we kind of hear about a lot in terms of high volume recruitment. The candidate is forgotten in that, and then whilst they might not have been right for that role, they were right for a different role, but then don't apply for it because of the poor experience they had the first time round.
But I think I love that. I think I'd say two things on that. I think one is, so Pinpoint, we're very lucky we get to see kind of the whole market. And we're really proud to work with much more what I would call real, or some, traditional businesses, retail, hospitality, logistics, manufacturing, those sorts of. If you talk to our retail clients or our hospitality clients, their applicants are their customers, right? And so like, it's not just transcending the recruitment experience and giving people the warm and fuzzies, but it's thinking about, hey, this person shops in my store, maybe today. Yeah. And like, is that rejection email going to leave them feeling good, or is it going to leave? And we've got people sending people gift cards to buy things in the store if they get through the process to a certain point. And we've got people really thinking about what that means experientially. And we're excited to play a role in that. But I think it's also just trying to make sure that we're like actually being considerate at every stage in the process, being as transparent as possible, talking through what's happening and why. And like, even silly things, right? Like, some people will complain that candidates are using AI to apply for more jobs than ever and personalize their comms. And I get the frustration there, although it's just a function of the market. We see some people flip that whole problem on its head and make it an opportunity. So if you know that Louise, in this example, has applied for 200 retail roles, you probably also realize that Louise doesn't intimately know every single one of the JDs for every single one of those roles. So 2 weeks later, hopefully quicker, but realistically, a week or two later, when she gets an email inviting her to interview, she's got no clue what job she applied for. So we've got smart clients sending Louise, hey, we'd love to meet you. By the way, here's the job description again. Here's why you want to work at this company. Here's the thing that matters about what we're looking for in the interview, because volume's gone up and it's hard for the candidate too, right? And so, I don't know, I think you just have to try and work hard to be a good actor, and the tools are just tools. It's actually intent that matters.
Exactly. And I think I remember an example from when I was working with a trusted expecting a new recruitment solution. They high volume care, lots of locations in the UK, high volume of applications. And what they used to do was the recruiters used to call the candidate and say, you just applied for this job with us. First of all, let's get on Google Maps and work out what it's going to take you to get to work in this location. What's your bus fare going to be? Do you think you'll be able to afford that every day? And they had these kind of really honest conversations with the candidate. And actually, that's something that you can personalize at scale using AI and automation, isn't it? In terms of that kind of experience of, you've just applied for this. What does this actually look like in real life for you if you were successful, so that we're not wasting any of our time on this?
Yeah, and that's something that's, by the way, amazing. We don't hear stuff like that very often. I wish we did. I think that's very hard to do at scale, or it was very hard to do at scale, whereas today it isn't, because we know the address of the candidate that's applying. We can work all that out. We could put that in an email automatically. And like that, there's just things we can do today that we couldn't in the past. And I love that. I love that.
Personalization at scale is the ultimate.
Yeah, but people have been doing this in retail and experiential stuff for a really long time. And I think there's a role for it in recruitment that we've not kind of leveled the game up yet. And I think hopefully this is the straw that breaks the camel's back.
It's interesting because I think we see this a lot more in marketing, actually. And marketing seems to be ahead of the curve in terms of they've been doing this for a long time in terms of data and looking at how the buyer looks at their website and things to a basket and these kind of things. And it's very similar in terms of attracting candidates to an organization. There's still the employer brand and that element of using the same level of data and snooping, I would say, in terms of how the candidate journey actually works. I know you tend to be a bit more of the naysayer, Louise, don't you, in terms of some of the AI features. So I'm interested to hear your rebuttal on some of this.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
I guess that sort of leads in a way to like the ethics and candidates' trust when it comes to AI. So going back to the candidate experience, so you're applying for many, many jobs. And as you said, Tom, sometimes you don't even know which ones actually you have applied for because of the use of AI. So what are the must-haves for ensuring transparency?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good question. I think there's different levels of maturity, right? I think like my must-have is be as absolutely transparent as you can be at all times proactively, right? And I think the proactively piece is the important part here. So I think like, for example, and this isn't a Pinpoint thing, you could do this, I'm sure, with any ATS, but like we have a lot of clients now putting hiring workflow overviews on their job descriptions, right? So you can click in at the bottom of a job description and understand, what am I signing up for? How long does it typically take to navigate through this process? And what does each stage look like? What are you expecting of me? kind of what are we looking for? Are we actually spelling that out? And I think that plays a huge role. We see conversion increase when people include that in job descriptions and so on. I think the second piece is actually making a really conscious effort. And you know, you've asked me to talk about AI, so I'll keep looping back to it. But like, what context and data do you have that you can learn from your hiring process to feed that back? So it's one thing to say, here's your hiring overview, this is what it's roughly going to look like. But what we've got really clever people doing is saying, well, hey, let's go through all of our interview transcripts at the beginning of a process and at the end and understand what questions candidates are asking about the organization and about the process. And then let's go and find the patterns, and then write answers to those and chuck them on the careers site in an FAQ section and reference that in every email we send the candidates, right? And like, the point is not just like, how can you answer questions, but also how can you preempt stuff? Because we want to make sure that we're removing all of the friction. And there's a lot of stuff that candidates want to know, and this is not an ethics thing, this is just being good people. There's a lot of stuff candidates want to know that they're scared to ask. Yeah. So go find out what those things are and ask about those things, and then put them on your website proactively so people can see them and so they don't have to ask them, right? Like, it depends how deep you want to go, but I think the intent is what matters, and intent's been easier now than it's ever been, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because it's the same with sales, isn't it? That's what happens in sales. You call out the objection that you expect the customer to have without them having 100%. To and state the objection, because people don't like objections.
They don't. Yeah, absolutely. But you're trying to kind of make it clear to them. And I think that the thing that comes across, certainly in our own recruitment experiences, we really just get so many compliments. And it's not actually about what's written in the answers to the bloody questions. It's the fact that you took the time to give me this stuff before I needed to ask you for it, tells me everything I need to know about your organization. And I'm excited to have a chat now. And I think people underweight the kind of sentimental second order impact of all this stuff.
Yeah. Where does Pinpoint end the process in terms of TA? Is it onboarding, or is it beyond? Where does the product actually take it to?
Yeah, so we sort of see the world, obviously there's been a lot of HR tech evolution over the years, right? Like, we sort of see the world as coming down to fundamentally two systems, a pre-hire and a post-hire platform. So the post-hire is your HRIS or equivalent. Yeah. We think we're everything before that. So basically everything up to the point the employee starts within your organization, we sort of do soup to nuts, from workforce conception and planning and rec all the way through to sort of sourcing, selection, assessing, interview, etc. So like, we have a dedicated onboarding solution as well. And I think, like, for us, and especially in the world and climate we're in, we're seeing sort of like average tenure within organizations go down. So the ability to mobilize them quicker and continue a great candidate experience all the way through that kind of pre-boarding and onboarding has been really important to customers, which is why we do that. But everything post that, we trust your HR system.
Yeah. Especially at the scale that you operate in.
Going back, Tom, one of my other questions, I suppose, again, thinking about the candidate experience and everything that you've described.
Yeah.
If AI is being used, say, for the sifting process, so let's say that the AI has got really sort of specific measures in there that the candidates have to have A, B, and C to even be put forward for an interview. How do you stop? I suppose it's two questions. How do we make sure that the AI isn't biased towards certain groups? And number two, what is your opinion on then, I suppose, the loss of the human within that process? Because some of the best people that I've hired may not have been the best ones on paper through the CV, but they're the ones that would really fit the business. You can see them talking to customers and really, with a bit of refinement, being your star employees. How do you think that we overcome that in AI? So it's the two questions. How do we stop the bias, number one? And how do you keep the human in the loop when it seems to be very much out of it within that hiring process, within the sifting stages?
Yeah, probably the biggest questions in the space right now, right? Honestly. And I think they're great questions. I think, like, if we take them sort of one by one. So on the how do you prevent bias thing, I think there's a couple of pieces here, right? One is don't make the mistake of actually removing what you want the outcome to look like from the process, right? I think people have this sense that AI in recruitment is only looking at the past and it's not taking instruction. So like, yes, you absolutely want to use training data. What did you do before? Who was successful? What did that look like? But there's a lot of nuance there, right? Firstly, like, what are you actually seeing as the outcome? So most people will look at, if they do some sort of backward modeling on their what we would call training data, they'll look at who did we hire. I would factor in wildly that is the wrong thing to optimize for. You want to look at what did those hires do, because you don't want to essentially fill a leaky bucket, right? And often the people you hire are not the people who are most performant. So you need to make sure you've got a clear picture coming back into your recruitment process from your post-hire performance.
Yeah.
The second thing is, what we're actually not asking most organizations to do, unless they're already perfect, and I've yet to meet one, is just repeat the outcome that's already happening quicker. What we're asking for is what's the layer of accretion on top, right? So we'll say, go use the training data to understand what's happened in the past. But actually what we're looking for is more of X, less of Y, more of A and B and C. And it's the combination of those two things that mean what you don't end up with is the sort of stereotypical concern of, well, we're going to hire another 40-year-old white man, went to this university that has this skill set. And instead we're optimizing for this outcome. And what does that look like? And often, to your point, Louise, that there is a huge delta in what you thought the answer was going to be and what the answer actually is. And so there's a piece there. And I think the second thing I'd say on that is there has been a huge progress in the quality of the underlying, like LLMs, the modeling and the technology that's underpinning all of this stuff, where the volume of training data looks much wider. And what I mean by that is the case study was always like Amazon training a model on the people they'd hired and it's spitting out more people that looked and sounded like the people they'd already hired. That sort of makes sense as an outcome because it's trained on one organization's data, whereas businesses like ours have obviously very large quantities of very anonymized data across lots of organizations, industries, scales, and geographies. And so our model is inherently less biased towards one particular profile of individual and is sort of the wisdom of the crowds, if you will. But I think the third thing I'd say, and the sort of lowest hanging fruit opportunity on the removal of bias, is that piece I made earlier, which is kind of a geeky frame, and I'm sorry about that, but inference and binary things are not the same. And what I mean by that is, like, we see a lot of people trying to do very clever things by saying, well, here's Louise's CV. Is she good at blah? And does she have this skill? My argument is just ask Louise that question as a yes or no question. It adds 3 seconds to an application process, which doesn't really matter that much to conversion from the data we see. We have millions of data points there. But actually, don't try and infer things. You can just ask. And if Louise is asked if she has this skill, or she has 3 years of experience doing this, or if she's got blah, blah, blah certification, and she says no, it is absolutely fair to remove her from the process and not ever look at Louise, because you are replicating human behavior. But if you're going to look at Louise's CV and decide whether she's really good at Photoshop, I would argue that's a fallacy and we shouldn't be doing that, right? And so I think, like, there's just this risk that we tar selection automation with this kind of very consistent brush, when actually under the hood, there's ways of doing this very gracefully.
Yeah.
I can keep going, but like, all I'm trying to say is I think that black box needs to be better understood, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a conversation. It wasn't about recruitment, but sort of over-engineered solutions, where sometimes organizations have tried to be so clever. People have stopped asking the basic questions and stopped talking to each other. It doesn't always need 100%. A process or a workflow, or in this instance, AI doing something. You can strip it back to basics and just ask. And I dare say that in the example that you gave, Tom, that candidate will then actually feel better about the process too, because they've been asked quite a simple question, their view, can you do this? Rather than just feeling part of an automated process and not really being as engaged with the organization as they could be, being that the recruitment process is the front door, as you said, James. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Go on, James, sorry.
I'm going to say reputationally as well. I think in terms of lots of people who are applying for jobs at the moment, I don't know if your LinkedIn feed is the same as mine, or maybe it's just an algorithm thing, but I see a lot of posts from people publicly naming and shaming the experience that they've had with big organizations in terms of the recruitment process and rejection emails that they've had, but also the opposite kind of examples where they've had a really nice experience that I didn't get the job, but I wanted to share that this was actually a really positive thing. And, you know, Glassdoor and things like that don't take long to look at, do they? And a lot of people are spending more time researching the place they want to work for, because it's not just, is this the job I want? It's, is this going to be doing something that makes me feel good? And that's much more emergent, I think.
100%. And I think like, and we'll no doubt talk about how the labor market's evolving, but I think like there's just a lot underneath all of this stuff. And I think it's very easy. And we spend a lot of time talk about this at Pinpoint. Like we process millions and millions of candidates a month, right? And I think it's very easy for us to sit here in isolation and see that candidate as like a row in a spreadsheet. But like that's a real person applying for a real job. They've probably got a family to support. They might have to move to do that job. Like there's a lot underpinning all of these things. These are quite emotional decisions for the candidate. And we try hard to make sure that we don't forget the sort of weight of that experience. And oftentimes we'll try and sort of own more of the candidate experience on behalf of our clients, because not everybody is good at that or has the capacity to do it. And we feel like a great responsibility to make sure we're delivering on behalf of the people we work with. But I think it's just like that nuance is really important, as I say. And the point that was made about, if I ask, you know, Tom, if he's capable of doing X and he says no, I've yet to see a candidate upset to be rejected on that basis, right? And I think there is just a lot of over engineering happening. We have this functionality in beta, it's not publicly released yet, that we call auto job audits. And what it does is when you finish a job, it will basically go back and do like a debrief as if you've got the world's best recruiter and say, here's what we would have done differently, and here's where the process fell short, and here's what you can optimize, and here's how you can improve the candidate experience. And we're trialing this with a lot of people at the moment and behind closed doors. The biggest thing that it's recommending is really unsexy and really boring, and it's just ask 3 or 4 pointed pre-screening questions, and you'll eliminate 70 to 80% of the volume, and you can and that's an automation outcome. That's not an AI thing at all.
Yeah. You touched on it there in terms of the job market, but the last 5 years has just been absolutely wild, hasn't it, in terms of the labour market. And we went through COVID, post-COVID, the Great Resignation, and I remember everybody talking about it then, but it doesn't seem to have ever calmed down since then in terms of the transience of the workforce. So how are you seeing that?
Sadly, the same way you are. I think like we seem to sort of go from one perceived crisis to another, right? And I also don't see an end in sight in that. I think like, look, what's when we entered the market sort of 9 years ago-ish, I think that was the sort of trigger point where we saw the power shift from company to candidate. You know, our first messaging when we were out in the market was, you're not buying, you're selling, right? You're selling opportunity, you're not buying labor, and stop calling people resources. It's like you're selling opportunity. And it was about shifting the narrative on the employer brand side and the sourcing side. I think like we saw in COVID that accelerate, and then off the back of that, we saw that shift, and we saw a lot of bad actors where companies felt like they had some power again, and they stopped investing in candidate experience and made their process painful, and their response to recruiter capacity was just make it horrible for candidates. And I think we've seen the sort of separation of experience be a really good thing, because it's created opportunity for people to be more competitive than they used to be in terms of recruitment. And then today, the problem is just volume on both sides, right? Candidates are perceived to be acting poorly, but they're forced to, because that's the only way they can navigate a tough labor market. And companies are seen to be perceived poorly, but they're forced to, because the macroeconomic picture is pretty bleak. It's pretty challenging for folks. There's lots of instability. Recruitment teams are small and capacity constrained. And I think the big thing we see is sort of people can't see the wood for the trees, right? If you go speak to recruiters, they're under so much pressure, and we really empathize with this, that sometimes they haven't even got the 10 minutes or the hour to put their head above the parapet and ask questions about what they could do better and sort of buy themselves the right to be more strategic. And that's where we try and be that layer of value automatically, rather than really needing much from you, right? But there's still friction everywhere. And so it's a tough environment, and we shouldn't forget that. But as I say, I do think my hope is that we come out of the back of it with TA being much more strategic. And I think it's like, can we start reframing the questions? You know, to Louise's earlier point on bias and candidate experience. I think a lot of the problems with some of those things are actually downstream of the fact that we're often recruiting for the wrong things, right? Historically, we've recruited for very specific skills or very specific amounts of experience and things like this. Look, the world we live in now just doesn't look like that, right? Role tenure is down, role frequencies and changes are up. We need to be learning to recruit for different things. And I think that in itself also helps solve some of the bias problem, because people don't get screened out for ludicrous reasons because they haven't got 10 years of Claude experience that's only been around for 3. And so, like, yeah, my hope is it's a net positive thing, but it's a sort of tough ride to ride right now.
Yeah. And small improvements at every step of the journey, like the manager creating the job in the first place, or the kind of request bit, and the recruiter reviewing the process will hopefully help with that. I think just in terms of kind of as we start to wrap up towards the end, one of the things I'm interested in is what made you found Pinpoint in the first place? What was your interest in TA?
Yes, I mean, you may be able to tell I'm a nerd by trade, so I'm not actually a TA professional, and proud to be in the space today. I think the reason I set the business up was this is my 4th company. I'd had a failed business when I was young, and like I set up a little software business when I was 16 and grew that to like 10 people, and then blew up in my face, and I ate a lot of humble pie. And I think I kind of learned that people actually matter. And then I was fortunate to go on and do a couple of other businesses, some of which were successful. And I learned there that I'm a terrible engineer, but I quite like what I would call organizational design. So like I think of companies as products and systems, and I'm really interested in this kind of future of work dialogue. And so want to spend my career there. Felt like there was an opportunity in TA. I think when we entered the market, there were some amazing brands that we respect, the Greenhouses and the Levers and the Smart Recruiters, but they'd all been in the market like 10 years at that point, and we felt like there was room for a challenger to come in and ask different questions. And so just excited to talk about this kind of future stuff. And it felt like if I'm interested in org design, getting the people right is the most important part of that.
Yeah. Now, like I say, we've only come across Pinpoint from kind of a third-party perspective. There's customers already using it, and nobody ever has any bad things to say about it. And it's a dream to integrate with. So thank you for that.
I mean, I appreciate that. All I'd say on that is I think that in itself is worth not laboring, but doubling down on, which is that like the data stuff that underpins all these things within Pinpoint, but forget Pinpoint, any system you're using in your TA or your HR stack more largely, they all need to play much nicer with each other, right? Like, because ultimately this sort of foundational layer of data is the thing that's actually going to predicate whether AI is successful for your business or it isn't. And I think lots of people are focusing on that note taker's cool, or this sourcing thing is really clever, but they're not actually getting the underlying stuff right. And I think we see the solve for that is actually just have Pinpoint do all of it. But I think we should be expecting from all HR vendors an open API and an open platform and the ability to move freely between these systems. Because if you can't offer that, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but AI is never going to work for you.
Yes. But I think you mentioned there in terms of the a failed business that you'd had in the past. So we won't ask you about your back when you were green, maybe. But in terms of something that you want to give the green light to, is there something that you've kind of an idea that you've got, or something that you have in your product that people don't really use? Anything that you would give the green light to?
There's a million examples of this. I think like I'll maybe pull out one thing. I think so. We have an MCP, so a tool you can plug into your sort of ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, whatever you're using, and exposes all of your Pinpoint account. We were really early to that. We think it's really important. I think to the sort of undercurrent of a lot of this conversation, the friction in all of this stuff is actually often engagement. And like Pinpoint's great. We think it's easier to use than any ATS, but the easiest thing to use is the thing that's already where you are. And so what we love is organizations using the MCP to drive real engagement with their hiring managers and their leadership. And we've just onboarded a really cool client called Infor, and there's some leaders there that have got bespoke dashboards, sending data all over the place using MCP and pulling the data out, Pinpoint, presenting it and branding it beautifully, pulling in other data from other systems and sending that. And like the idea of MCP for us is you can do whatever you want. And we think we're good at being responsive to a feature request. And often that might get built in days, weeks, or months for big stuff. But our CSMs can have conversations with clients and build them something using MCP in hours. And I think that is so exciting. And so there's some really cool examples of that on our website, and you can go check them out. But it's sometimes the sort of lower hanging fruit things that actually deliver the real change.
Yeah. the simple things that actually make a big difference. Yeah.
Shouldn't we say that?
Picking up on a point you made there, I think my green light idea this week would be when I think the UK government actually made a rule, didn't they, that all phones and things had to have the same socket in terms of the actual connection, so you couldn't get an old iPhone cable anymore. Yeah, I think, picking up on your point, every software vendor should be mandated to have to create an open API capability securely, so that you can get data across, because there are some that are just an absolute pain to work with. And you're quite right in terms of the future of AI. I kind of stand back and look at this as, in a business, if I've got 10 different applications that have all got AI within them, I want them all to be able to talk to each other as well, and not just have some of their own data. So open API capability, I think, is going to be increasingly important, and that's what I want to give the green light. So somebody should mandate that, definitely, that all software companies to give you access to your data via an API.
Agree.
Have you got one for this week, Louise?
Yeah. A green light. Mine feels like it's always sort of the same kind of thing. But we've spoken, haven't we, a lot about candidates, trust, human in the loop. I don't know if I used this example on one of our previous HR Green Room podcasts, but one of my friend's sons was applying for college, and as part of that application, they had to go through an interview, but without another human in there. So the interview questions would just appear on the screen, tell us about yourself. And they were obviously sat being recorded and having to go through those questions, which presumably would then be either assessed by AI or by a human. And it might just be my age, but I thought, my God, that would make me so uncomfortable. I'm not sure how sort of other Gen Z, etc., might feel about that. But I think my green light for this week is, as we said, having humans talking to each other, no matter which part of the process it is, whether it's recruitment, whether it's something, internally in the organization, going back to basics, and actually remembering that it is co-pilot for a reason, and having that human in the loop.
Well, we are almost out of time, I think, now, aren't we? It's been a fantastic conversation. Very, very grateful to you, Tom, for your insights. And Louise, as ever, great green light idea there. Thank you for joining us in the HR Green Room. It's been a really interesting conversation today with Tom and Louise, as ever. Please follow us online, give us some comments if you want us to suggest topics for future episodes, and keep giving the green light to the things that matter the most.